Hi, and welcome back to Abigail's Bookshelf. I'm Abigail, and today we are going to talk about something that I have noticed across a couple of different books. I'm going to talk today about one book in particular, but I think there's all of this conversation about books not being edited enough and like how the quality of what's being published is going down. And I semi-agree with this. I think that there is some validity to that statement. And I think also people are interpreting editing maybe not 100% objectively, but I want to talk about an aspect of this that I haven't really seen anyone else talk about. In particular, how this seemingly lack of editing has, for me, kind of ruined a series that I was really, really excited about. And I think it's not necessarily that they weren't edited enough. I think that's definitely the case. But I think it's also that like some books that hit really, really big are getting sequels really, really fast. And I have felt that the quality of those sequels has been so far below the original. And I think that that is what is kind of creating some of the issues that people are seeing with books not feeling edited enough. So today we're going to talk about the book Snowglobe by Korean author So-young Park. I have a lot of feelings and they're not all good. So let's get into it. Have you ever read a really good book? One that like really stuck with you, that had you combing Tumblr for fan art at 3 a.m., that you recommended to literally everyone you know, that you wanted to give as a gift to every single person in your life, reader and non-reader alike? And then you find out there's a sequel and you are so excited. You're rereading the first book, trying to guess what might come up in the sequel, picking out plot threads or characters that really intrigued you and you wanted to see explored more. And then the sequel comes out and you read it with bated breath and it sucks. This is unfortunately not a hypothetical. This happened to me recently. I read an arc of Snowglobe by Korean author So-young Park when I was working as a bookseller in 2023. I was immediately hooked on this dystopian world, ravaged by nuclear war and climate disaster, where the surviving communities are dealing with the fallout by setting up real reality TV, in which the actors are constantly being filmed, unscripted, yet coached by directors who set up everything, every horrid and thrilling plot point from any K-drama you've ever seen. I'm talking tragic accidents, I'm talking vengeful murders, I'm talking meet cutes, I'm talking everything in between. Inside the snow globe, a glass dome in which the climate is as carefully controlled as the citizens' broadcast lives, the energy comes from satellite villages who survive the freezing temperatures of the outside world by walking endlessly in giant hamster wheels to power the TV shows they spend their lives consuming. So, kind of a chicken and egg situation. Our hero is Jo Chobam, who is asked to leave her village by famous snow globe director and take the place of the world's sweetheart Go Harry, who has secretly died. Promising her family wealth and Chobam a place in the elite directors academy, director Cho takes Chobam into the snow globe, into her new life as the world's most watched and beloved reality star. But Chobam swiftly learns that life in the snow globe isn't as carefree and beautiful as it appears on TV, and she must decide if she's willing to give up her own identity for the privileges of someone else's. I loved this book the first time I read it. It filled the Hunger Games shaped hole in my heart. It was thrilling. The concept was original and intriguing and tightly developed. The main character was spunky and smart, but also flawed. I was really into watching K-dramas at the time. I still am, but more so then. So I enjoyed seeing the trademarks of that genre in this book. I found questions that Park raised about surveillance and privilege and power to be pertinent and not heavy-handed as YA can sometimes be. So I was thrilled to get the sequel within the year. However, what first appeared to be a miracle was actually a curse. I found the sequel to read much more like a first draft, with plot lines and scenes thrown in kind of helter-skelter without the appropriate pacing. There were 1,000 ideas in here, and none of them had the time they needed to be developed and to breathe. As the reader, I had no time to sit with what was happening, to speculate on what it might mean, or anticipate what might come next. I was hurtled through plots that didn't last longer than a chapter, bombarded with the MC's rhetorical questions, dragged along through arcs that had no grounding at all in the first book. There were scenes of the story that were repeated verbatim from one chapter to the next. I assume that was an attempt to remind me of important things, but I'm not 3, and I can remember what happened in the last chapter. Thank you very much. It was just all in her mess, and it was not satisfying. It was alien from the meaning and the themes of the first book. I know recently in book spaces, there's been a lot of discourse about books not being edited enough, and I feel like this book wasn't written enough. It felt like a first draft, not like a finished story. And I do think a lack of developmental editing, which is when the big structure parts of the story are reviewed and tightened by a professional editor, was definitely responsible for the failure of this book to me. I also think, though, that there is a bigger issue at play. And that's the recent push from publishing to print books as fast as possible. Snowglobe was released in English in February of 2024. The sequel was released in May of 2025. Allowing for roughly a year from finished draft to book on a shelf, which according to the novelry is a typical lifespan of a book, that means Park had generously 3 months to write the first draft of this book. If it was greenlit in February 2024, generously January 2024, December 2023, based on pre-release figures, and then had to be ready for print in a year's time, allowing for a few more months of emails back and forth, of edits and Park's touring schedule and publicity runs, I think 4 months was probably the absolute maximum amount of time she had to take this from idea to polished second or third draft to submit to editors. Not that I think this book made it to a second draft. I am not a professional writer. I do not write full-time, nor have I ever had to write to any deadline but my own or my writing groups. So I don't know what this is like, and a lot of what I'm saying is speculation based on information from a variety of professional sources, but I can say that it takes me at least 6 months to write a first draft that's workable, and that's just getting the block of marble out of the quarry, to borrow an expression from Amy, the editor. It takes me longer to be able to refine that block into art. I know professional writers with multiple books under their belts can do this much faster than that. And I know that some people are just fast drafters, but in this specific case, I think the sequel is showing that Park needs more time to develop something great. I think she was simply not given that time. This is not unique to this book. There are plenty of books that have been rushed out in the past 5 years as publishers try to chase the seemingly fleeting attention spans of readers. Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross was released in April of 2024, and the sequel came out by December. Even more quickly than that, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros was released in April of 2023, and a sequel was out by October of the same year. That's crazy. It seems that when something hits big, there's like this big imaginary timer ticking down the seconds that an author or publisher has until everyone moves on and no longer cares about something. While I've also felt impatient waiting for the next installment of my favorite series, I seem to be more capable of waiting than a publisher is. I read book 1 in December of 2023, and then I read book 2 in December of 2025. I've had the arc in my hands at least since April. I just had other things to read, and y'all know I read stuff when it's ready for me. Today, fame is very clearly fleeting. A video can go viral in a matter of hours and be entirely wiped from public consciousness within a week. When the internet brings everything in the world to our fingertips in seconds, people whose job it is to sell things need to have the next thing ready as soon as the first is consumed. Attention spans are shrinking, and sellers need to not only grab your attention, but hold it for as long as possible, and it seems like that timer is only getting shorter. This would be its own interesting problem, indicative of our culture and the ways in which people chase money in every industry, even one that likes to tout itself as an industry of art over market. I'm rolling my eyes, by the way. But there is another interesting facet of this conversation that I would like to bring up. You might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, if an author wanted their debut to be the first in the series, then when they have the first one published, they already have the second book ready, right? Isn't the issue of having to rush one fabricated by the author? Why weren't they prepared? There's a different conversation to have about established authors like Rebecca Ross or Rebecca Yarros, but in the case of debut authors, they most likely won't have the sequel even drafted when they're querying the first book because agents and publishers specifically ask you not to debut with a series. In fact, I had an editor at a major publishing group tell me that they gave priority to standalone books because the industry prefers to be able to take a chance on two separate books from a debut author, which can have two separate audiences, rather than a series, which will logically and traditionally reduce the audience reach for book two. Book one can have a huge audience, anyone who is interested in the story. But that audience shrinks in book two. Now the audience is only people who have read the first book. It's bad business. A publisher would rather have two big nets to cast rather than one big net and one small net. And that does make sense. Still, most say they like books with series potential, that it's on everything. People enjoy reading series and people enjoy writing series. So often, debut authors seeking publication will set up their first book with just enough pieces unsatisfied so they could write a sequel or two if the book does well and won't have lost anything if the publisher drops book two because book one didn't sell. But usually someone trying to get published won't invest a ton of time and energy into writing a sequel if they aren't successful querying the first book. They'll put a pin in that story and go on to write something else that they can attempt to query instead. The hope is to go back and to be able to publish the series, but realistically, if you're trying to get published, you're thinking along the same lines as the publisher. I need options to sell. In case they don't like this one, I have something different I can try out. You can't sell the second book unless you've sold the first one. It's not unheard of for unpublished writers to write an entire series before the first one sells, but someone seriously trying to get published is advised to write standalones until they sell. As an aside, circling back to Yarros and Ross, I think they also had some of the same issues as a debut author, simply because these books were the ones that catapulted their careers. They'd published before, but not with the same levels of national and cultural success that they had with these books. While they had more experience as writers, having cut their teeth on earlier work, learned the processes that work for them, having the experience of developed a narrative voice, perhaps that turnaround wasn't as problematic to their output than someone like Park, who had only one book under her belt. Still, in terms of publishing push, both Rebeccas are actually more in line with Park's experience, that expedited timeline, than someone like V. Schwab, who was able to return to an early book that was supposed to be a series but didn't perform well enough for publishers to want the next book when the first one was released. Vicious, the first book in the Villain series, was released to moderate success in 2013. The sequel was finally picked up and released in 2018 following the success of the Shades of Magic series, and the third and final book will be released in 2026 following VE's launch into the literary stratosphere with The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue in 2020. While Schwab's experience was different, I think it illustrates well the point that I'm making that publishers don't care about satisfying readers or putting out great original art, but in publishing what will make them the most money when they think it will make them the most money. In the case of Park, the first book did do well. So well, her publishers wanted book two yesterday. Perhaps part of that push was also the news of a studio deal. The book will be adapted by the Korean studio that made hits like Crash Landing on You and Sweet Home. This is another facet that I don't have time to go into, but the prevalence of books being announced with studio deals on their heels is also putting pressure on that original work production. The most recent Hunger Games adaptations were announced before the book was even on the shelf. We had stars before we had a book synopsis. I have no way of knowing for certain what Park's experience with this was. I can only speculate based on the information that I have. According to an interview with Publishers Weekly, upon the release of the first installment, Park talked about laboring over the story for years before she submitted it to a contest in 2020. The book not only won, but was able to breach into American publishing offices, not something typically done by international authors in YA, especially in translation. I couldn't find any information about the process between 2020 to publication in 2024, but I imagine there was editing done alongside translation and that the book was made sharper as a result of that. So not only did she spend several years working on it in isolation, but she spent 4 years working to get it published in the American markets. The point is that Park had time to marinate the idea, to prune it, to sharpen it with life experience and professional guidance before I had it in my hands. And I think that shows with the strength of the first book. The second one was amateur to me. It felt rushed, like ideas were thrown in as they popped into her head, like no one else pressed against any of those ideas to see if they could actually hold weight. In my own process, my first draft is almost entirely alien to my final draft. Things get simplified, pacing is set, character behaviors and motivations are more consistent. The bones of the story get stronger with time. I don't think this story had enough time to get strong. There were too many side characters, too many side plots that weren't fleshed out. There was a lot of telling over showing. There were arcs that didn't reach their conclusion or were like just genuinely confusing. It felt emotional in that Park was writing what felt exciting or thrilling. That's important for the first draft, for an author to find the places where the pulse of the story is, but not all of those moments are meaningful enough to last. There were things that didn't match with what was in the first book. The whole thing felt haphazard and inconsistent in a way that was very disappointing compared to the first book. Again, I don't know Park's process. I don't know if she actually wrote this book in the spur of the moment or if she'd been working on it since 2020. However, I am pretty confident in saying that based on the differences I've identified between the two books, she had much less time to write the second book than she did the first one. And with the pressure also of a big American deal and a big American audience. What's extra annoying to me is that I know Park is a talented and thoughtful writer. In her interview with the American Booksellers Association when Snowglobe 1 came out, she spoke a lot about the things that I care about in good writing, specifically the idea that each character, regardless of the scope or size of their role, must have good solid ground to behave the way they do. This is one of the things that I loved in book 1, this constant reminder that everyone is the hero of their own story or the lead of their own K-drama. Most people are only focused on their own goals and desires and work to sabotage or aid others when it suits their own goals. Everyone is just trying to make their TV show the best, and they will treat everyone else like a bit role to make themselves look better. I don't mean this as a dig or a sweeping generalization that people are inherently selfish and narcissistic, but Park shows in book 1 that we are all the stars of our own shows, and the only part we can ever play is, well, ours. At the end of the day, publishing is an industry. It can try to sell itself as an art form, and writing 100% is. But most publishers and some writers at the end of the day care about the bottom line. They want money and they want it now. They don't care how the product actually turns out. Readers especially have always illustrated a lot of loyalty to writers and to stories and to franchises, for better or worse. And publishers know this. They think you will buy it because it has a certain name on it and won't complain very much if it's not even good, or if the author uses that clout to harm minority populations or uses her books to espouse ridiculous and hateful rhetoric. Again, sweeping generalizations. At the end of the day, the next book will be out tomorrow, and who cares how good this one is? There's no hard data on how many books are published each year, but with the rise of self-publishing and the push towards AI, the numbers are only going up from here. According to the International Publishers Association, the US alone registered over 3.5 million unique ISBNs in 2018. While some of those numbers can be duplicated, paperbacks, ebooks, etc., each get their own unique ISBN, even if they are the same title. It shows that there's an insane supply of books available in the world at any one time. But what about the demand? Well, reading for pleasure is declining among Americans. What was once part of daily life is instead becoming something that people aspire to do. I don't have to tell you that people read books more when they didn't have iPhones or internet or shopping malls. A 2021 study of Gallup showed that the average American reads only 12 books per year, 1 per month. So you can clearly see why publishers think they need to rush. If you're only reading one book per month, they want the book you buy to be theirs, and nothing is easier than selling you the sequel to the book that you read last month and loved. I don't have a solution to this problem. I wanted to just point out some factors about the bigger conversation about editing that I had not seen brought up yet and discuss it as related to works in a series as it grows popular. I grew up waiting for years for books in a series to be released and be delivered by the mail system. And while I often grew and changed and aged out of series that I never returned to, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Not everything I enjoy is made specifically for me, and that's not only okay, but normal. Sometimes I aged out of things, lost interest, or just simply forgot about stuff. Sometimes I aged into something and was able to enjoy it even more the second time around. We are transient, and that's so fun to me. So what I'm saying is I would rather wait for the art to be good than have it right now. I can't avoid the elephant in the room here, which is the opposite side of the coin, in which some fantasy series have famously languished in purgatory unfinished for years and in some cases decades. Game of Thrones is famously unfinished, and the odds of it ever getting finished are getting slimmer every year. The Wheel of Time had to be finished by another author after the original author died. The King's Killer Chronicle is entering its second decade of waiting. While that's obviously frustrating, that's life. Sometimes things come to you and sometimes things don't. My favorite series of all time, you wouldn't know this, is The Locked Tomb by Tamsin Muir. And it has been in the electopause for about 3 years. I make a yearly meme about this because it's funny and in some ways does actually help me cope. But at the end of the day, 3 years is nothing. And I love this series so much that I am happy to wait until Muir is good and ready. I want that book to be just as good as the rest. And if that means Electo gets pushed off for another 10 years, that's fine. I'll wait. I'd also be happy to take any shaved off sequels a la None of the Ninth. In the meantime, so Tamsin, whatever works for you, bestie. I love this series. I trust this author and I want good art more than I want another ream of paper to put on my shelf. So all of this to say, I think there is maybe something else going on in the publishing world that's creating this sort of general feeling of books not being edited enough. I think there's very clearly a huge rush to make as much money as possible off of what appears to be a blip on the radar. I also just want to say, I think you should read Snowglobe 1. It's really good. It's really original. It's really fresh. I just think it's awesome. And I still believe that even after reading book 2 and feeling so disappointed with it. So I think it ends well enough that you can be satisfied with the ending and not need a second book. Again, series potential. And in fact, I think that the answers you would get in book 2 would be so unsatisfying anyway. So you're better off just kind of making it up for yourself or just saying, hey, we'll never know. Those are my thoughts and feelings. I hope you are having a wonderful 2026 and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Sorry if that was incoherent.